She thought it was a fake wedding. Then the millionaire whispered, "Nothing will be cancelled." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It started with a sentence that did not belong in real life. Marry me, but think of it as a contract. The clinking of cutlery froze. A jazz melody played softly in the background of the upscale San Francisco restaurant. But at that table by the window, time seemed to stop. Rose Bennett blinked. Sure, she had misheard the man sitting across from her. David Ward, 38, sharp suit. The kind of presence that could silence a room was not smiling. His tone was calm, almost too calm, as if marriage were a business term rather than a vow. "You mean a business deal?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "Exactly. A temporary arrangement. You will help me. I will help you. No feelings, no strings attached." For a moment, Rose thought it was a cruel joke. Who proposes a contract instead of love? Yet David looked deadly serious. His father's passing had left Ward Holdings hanging by a thread, and the board demanded stability before the annual shareholder gala. A married CEO looked safer to investors than a grieving bachelor. But why her? Rose's hands tightened around her glass. She was just a florist, running her late mother's shop on the edge of Mission District, a place that smelled of wilted roses and overdue bills. She could barely afford rent. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind. "Keep the shop alive, Rose. It is all we have left." David slid a velvet box across the table. Inside was a simple silver ring, unpolished, without initials. "You will wear this for 12 months. I will handle your debts. After that, we both walk away." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried something else, a flicker of fatigue, maybe loneliness. "You are serious," Rose whispered. "I'm always serious," he replied. The waiter approached with their drinks, unaware of the quiet storm between them. Rose stared at the ring, then at the city lights reflected in the glass window. It should have felt like an insult. Instead, it felt like an escape hatch. Her shop would be seized within the week. Her savings were gone, and the man offering her a lifeline was someone she barely knew, a stranger whose name appeared in business headlines, not fairy tales. "Why me?" she finally asked. David leaned back, his voice low. "Because you have nothing to gain from lying to me. And maybe that is exactly what I need right now, someone honest, even if it costs me everything." Outside, thunder rolled over the bay. Inside, the air grew still. Rose picked up the ring, turning it between her fingers. "You said it is only for a year?" "Yes, just 1 year. And after that, nothing?" He looked straight into her eyes. "Nothing will be cancelled. Unless you want it to be." Quote. The way he said it made her chest tighten. A promise or a warning? She could not tell. Rose slipped the ring into her palm and exhaled slowly. "Fine, I will do it." David's gaze did not soften, but something in his posture did. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and reached for his umbrella. "Then it is settled. Tomorrow you will be Mrs. Ward." As he walked away, Rose remained still, the rain beginning to drum against the window beside her. People around kept talking, laughing, eating. No one noticed the woman sitting there with a ring she had not asked for, and a decision that would turn her world upside down. And yet, somewhere between desperation and dignity, she felt something strange stir in her chest, not fear, but curiosity. What kind of man buys a marriage like a merger? And what happens when a contract begins to feel like love? The rain had not stopped that night. It trailed down the windows of Rose Bennett's small apartment, tracing crooked lines across the glass. The sound was steady, hypnotic, but it could not quiet her thoughts. On the kitchen table sat the small silver ring that David Ward had left her. Its dull surface caught the yellow glow from the street lamp outside. Rose stared at it for a long time, her thumb brushing over the edge. It looked harmless, simple, but it carried a weight that felt far heavier than gold. It was not a symbol of love. It was a contract. She turned her gaze toward the calendar on the wall. A red circle marked Friday, the day the bank would take her mother's flower shop. The final notice had arrived that morning. Payment overdue, property subject to foreclosure. She had read it 3 times and still felt numb. The shop had been her mother's dream, the place where Rose learned to braid stems and read the language of flowers. Now it was slipping through her fingers. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from David's assistant. Ward Tower, 10 a.m. Please bring valid ID. That was all. No greeting, no explanation. Rose let out a shaky breath. It was real. This strange agreement, this one-year marriage, was about to start. She looked around her apartment, cracked paint, a leaking faucet, unpaid bills stacked beside the sink. She had worked every weekend since her mother's passing, but the numbers never added up. San Francisco was expensive, and dreams did not pay rent. She opened her notebook and found a pressed rose petal between the pages. Her mother had once said, "Even wilted flowers can be beautiful, as long as someone still believes in them." Rose closed the notebook and whispered, "I am sorry, Mom. I am doing this for us." The next morning, she dressed carefully, her best blouse, a plain beige coat, and a nervous smile she did not feel. The city was still damp from the rain, the air thick with the smell of coffee and ocean salt. Buses hissed as they passed, and the streets shimmered with puddles. When she reached Ward Tower, the security guards greeted her with polite confusion. "Appointment?" one of them asked. Rose showed the message on her phone, and they escorted her to the elevator. The ride up felt endless. Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked like someone else, small, fragile, out of place. The doors opened to a quiet floor covered in gray carpet and glass walls. At the far end, David was standing by the window, phone in hand. He turned when she stepped in. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," she replied. He nodded, gesturing toward a table where a notary waited with a stack of papers. "We need signatures before noon. After that, you will move to the ward residence. There are clothes, staff, and transportation arranged." Rose blinked. "That soon?" "Yes," David said. "The gala is in 3 days. The public will expect my wife to be there." Quote. The word wife sounded strange, unreal. She took the pen, her fingers trembling slightly. The contract was thick pages filled with rules, timelines, and clauses. She read the first line. Duration, 12 months. Her eyes lifted to David's face. "You really planned everything." "I always plan," he said. She signed her name once, twice, 3 times. Each stroke felt like a step away from the life she had known. When the last page was done, David extended his hand. "Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Ward." Rose hesitated before shaking it. His hand was warm, steady, unlike his voice. "Do you ever regret making deals like this?" she asked quietly. He studied her for a moment. "Regret is for people who believe in luck. I believe in outcomes." There was no smile, no hint of kindness, just control. And yet, when their eyes met, she caught something human, something almost broken before he looked away. As she left his office, the silver ring in her pocket felt heavier than ever. She thought about the shop, the petals drying on the counter, the faded sign that read Bennett Blooms. By the end of the week, her name would change, her address would change, her life would change. But her heart? That remained a mystery. And as the elevator doors closed, Rose wondered softly to herself, was this survival, or was it surrender? The ink on the contract was barely dry when Rose Bennett found herself standing in the marble lobby of Ward Tower again, this time not as a visitor, but as someone with a title she could barely say aloud, Mrs. Ward. The words tasted foreign, like a role she had been cast in without an audition. David Ward walked beside her, silent, composed, every step precise. His assistant, a woman named Clara, followed with a tablet in hand, listing details in an even tone. The driver will take Mrs. Ward to the residence. A stylist will arrive at 6 for wardrobe fitting. The press has been instructed to release the marriage statement at noon tomorrow. Rose tried to keep her posture straight, but her stomach twisted with every word. "Press statement?" she asked softly. David glanced at her. "A formality. You do not have to say anything. I will handle the public side." She nodded, unsure whether to feel relieved or replaced. They stepped into the waiting car. San Francisco glimmered beyond the tinted windows, the fog curling over the bay, the streets alive with late-morning energy. The world outside looked ordinary. Inside the car, everything had changed. David spoke suddenly, breaking the silence. "You should know the boundaries before we begin." "Boundaries?" Rose repeated. He looked straight ahead. "There are 3. First, this marriage is confidential outside what the company must present. You will not speak to the media without permission. Second, You will attend 5 official events with me over the next 12 months. Third, you will not interfere in my personal or business affairs. In return, all your debts will be cleared within 48 hours. He turned to her, his tone measured. Do you understand? Rose nodded slowly. Yes, I understand. Quote, there was something sharp and clean about the way he spoke, like every word was a contract of its own. Yet beneath that precision, she could sense exhaustion, the kind that money could not cure. The car turned off the main road, winding through tall gates and into the long driveway of the Ward estate. The mansion rose ahead like a museum, glass, stone, and silence. The front doors opened as if by choreography. Staff members bowed politely as David entered. This will be your home, he said, his voice echoing faintly in the grand foyer. Rose looked up at the chandelier glittering above her, then down at her shoes damp from the rain. It is beautiful, she said honestly. It is empty, he replied. That single answer lingered between them. A maid led Rose upstairs to a guest suite that could have fit her entire apartment inside. The walls were pale ivory, the curtains long and heavy. On the vanity sat the silver ring she had worn to sign the contract, polished and waiting. She slipped it onto her finger and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back seemed older, calmer, but her eyes carried the same uncertainty. Dinner that evening was quiet. The table stretched between them like a distance neither of them dared cross. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the air. But Rose barely tasted a bite. At one point she gathered the courage to ask, "Do people often make arrangements like this in your world?" David looked up from his plate. "More often than you think. Most people just call it something else." Her heart gave a small, confused tremor. Later that night, she stood by the balcony, watching the lights of the city below. San Francisco glittered like a field of stars reflected on the ocean. She wondered what her mother would think if she could see her now living in a mansion, wearing a ring that meant nothing, sharing a name that was not hers. Behind her, David's voice broke the silence. "Tomorrow morning, Clara will brief you about the foundation gala. You will need a gown." Rose turned slightly. "Of course." He hesitated, almost as if wanting to say something else, but then only nodded and left the room. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall. She rested her hand against her heart and felt it beat too fast, too alive for something meant to be fake. And quietly, almost like a whisper to herself, she wondered, if you were in my place, would you sign a contract like this too? The next 3 days passed in a blur. Rose Bennett woke each morning before sunrise, still unsure where she was, until the smell of fresh coffee and the distant sound of ocean wind reminded her that she now lived in the Ward mansion. The place was magnificent, but strangely silent, as if beauty itself had forgotten how to breathe. Clara, David's assistant, had arranged everything: the wardrobe fittings, etiquette lessons, even posture coaching for the gala. "You will be photographed constantly," Clara explained while adjusting the hem of Rose's dress. "Smile softly, not too wide. And when you stand beside Mr. Ward, let him lead the space." Rose listened carefully. She was used to handling flower stems and ribbons, not luxury gowns worth more than her yearly income. The first time she saw herself in the mirror wearing the ivory gown chosen for her, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked elegant, refined, and distant, exactly what David's world demanded. At dinner on the third night, David spoke without looking up from his plate. "The gala begins tomorrow at 7. The event is a fundraiser for the Ward Foundation, so there will be press and donors. You only need to stay by my side and be polite." Rose nodded. "Understood." He glanced up briefly. "You do not have to act, Rose. Just be calm. People believe what they want to see." The way he said her name, calm but quietly protective, made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the question died on her tongue. The following afternoon, the house transformed into a small rehearsal ground. A stylist pinned her hair into a loose twist, a makeup artist brushed shimmer over her eyelids, and a photographer took profile shots for the official announcement. Every flash of the camera reminded her that this was not a dream. It was a performance. As they drove to the gala, San Francisco's evening lights blurred past the car window. David sat beside her, reading from his tablet, his expression unreadable. Rose tried to steady her breath. She had never attended an event like this, a ballroom filled with people whose wealth could buy entire neighborhoods. When they arrived, camera flashes burst like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, microphones reaching toward them. David took her hand, his grip firm. "Do not worry. Follow my lead." They entered the ballroom together, the room falling quiet for a heartbeat as people turned to see them. Chandeliers sparkled above a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Rose smiled as Clara had taught her, graceful but not forced. Guests approached, offering congratulations, admiration, curiosity. David introduced her with ease. "My wife, Rose Ward." Each time he said the words, Rose felt her pulse jump. "My wife." The sound of it was gentle, yet it carried a strange gravity she did not expect. Midway through the night, a reporter stopped them near the champagne table. "Mr. Ward, Mrs. Ward, your marriage was quite a surprise to the city. How did your love story begin?" Rose froze. Cameras hovered close. She looked at David, unsure. He smiled faintly and gave her hand a subtle squeeze, silently asking her to speak. "Sometimes," she began, her voice soft but steady, "you do not plan the right person. You just meet them and something in you recognizes home." The crowd murmured in delight. David's expression shifted, his usual restraint breaking into something warm, almost proud. As the music swelled, he leaned closer and whispered, "Well said." Hours later, when the gala ended, they rode home in silence. Rose stared out the window, her reflection framed by city lights. Something inside her had changed. The contract still existed, but the lines felt blurred. When they arrived at the mansion, David stepped out first, then turned and offered his hand. "You handled tonight perfectly," he said. "Thank you," Rose whispered. He paused, studying her face as if trying to memorize it. Then quietly, "Get some rest. Tomorrow, the world will think we are real." As she walked inside, her heart beat faster, echoing a truth she could not ignore, pretending was beginning to feel too real. The morning after the gala, the headlines spread across every business page in San Francisco. Ward's secret wedding. The billionaire finally settles down. Photos of Rose smiling beside David filled the screens in coffee shops and office lobbies. She had become a mystery the public wanted to solve. Who was the quiet woman who married the city's most private millionaire? Rose read one of the articles at the breakfast table, her coffee untouched. She barely recognized herself in the photographs, the calm face, the graceful posture, the woman who looked like she belonged in that world. But inside, she still felt like the florist from Mission District who could not sleep because of overdue bills. David entered the dining room, his usual composure wrapped around him like armor. "Do not pay attention to the papers," he said, glancing at her phone. "They will move on to something else by next week." "I was not looking for attention," Rose said softly. "I was just surprised." He sat across from her, folding the newspaper neatly. "You did well last night. The board is pleased. Donations doubled after your speech." "My speech?" she asked, a small laugh escaping. "I only said one line." "Exactly. You said it honestly. People trust honesty." For a moment, there was something like admiration in his eyes, but it faded as quickly as it came. The conversation shifted to practicalities, new schedules, upcoming charity visits, the need to maintain appearances. Later that afternoon, while David met with investors, Rose walked through the garden behind the mansion. The air smelled of sea salt and jasmine. She found a greenhouse filled with neglected plants and empty pots. The caretaker explained, "Mr. Ward's mother used to love this place. It has been closed for years." Rose touched one of the dusty glass panes and whispered, "Maybe it is time to open it again." She spent the next few days quietly reviving the greenhouse. Her hands, though now manicured and polished for public events, still remembered the rhythm of tending flowers. Slowly, color returned to the space-white lilies, pale roses, ivy climbing toward the light. The act of planting grounded her, giving her something real amid the performance of being Mrs. Ward. One evening, as she was trimming a stem, David appeared at the door. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the first time she had seen him look less than perfect. "I did not know anyone still came here," he said, stepping inside. "I guess now someone does," Rose replied, smiling faintly. He watched her arrange the flowers, quiet for a long moment. "My mother loved this garden," he finally said. "After she passed, my father closed it. He said beauty was a distraction." Rose looked up, her voice soft. "Beauty is not a distraction, David. It is proof that life goes on." He met her eyes, and something shifted. For once, the coldness in his expression cracked just enough to show the man underneath the one carrying years of loss. As they stood among the blooms, the air between them changed. It was not romance yet, but something gentler, something human. The next night during dinner, David asked her opinion on one of his foundation projects. "We are funding a scholarship program. Would you consider helping with the event design?" Rose blinked in surprise. "You want my help?" "I do," he said simply. "You have an eye for details people remember." It was a small invitation, but to her, it meant more than the entire mansion. Later, in her room, she could still hear his voice echoing in her head. She sat by the window, looking at the city lights. Everything was still a contract on paper, at least, but something invisible had begun to grow. She whispered to herself, unsure if it was a promise or a warning. "Maybe pretending to be a wife is teaching me what it means to be one." Quote. And for the first time since signing that deal, Rose went to sleep with her heart unguarded, wondering if David Ward was beginning to feel the same. The city lights of San Francisco shimmered across the bay as Rose Bennett stood on the rooftop terrace of the Ward mansion. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of salt and rain. Down below, the streets pulsed with the sound of traffic and laughter, but up here, everything felt quiet, suspended between distance and desire. David Ward was already there, leaning against the glass railing. He had removed his jacket, his white shirt open at the collar, his sleeves rolled halfway up his arms. The soft glow of the terrace lamps traced the sharp lines of his face. For the first time, he looked less like the untouchable CEO everyone feared, and more like a man trying to remember how to breathe. "You are avoiding the party," he said, not turning around. His voice was calm but softer than usual. Rose smiled faintly. "And you are avoiding the guests." He exhaled, a hint of amusement breaking through. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the fog creep in from the ocean. Somewhere behind them, the music from the charity dinner still played a distant rhythm of another world. Rose finally spoke. "You look different tonight." "How so?" he asked, still facing the city. "Not like someone pretending to care, like someone who actually did." Quote. David turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the lights below. "You notice everything, do you not?" "It comes from years of arranging flowers," she said with a small laugh. "You learn to see the little things others overlook." He smiled at that, a quiet, tired smile. Then he said, almost to himself, "I used to believe noticing details was weakness. In business, emotion gets in the way. But we are not talking about business," Rose said softly. The words hung in the air, heavier than she meant them to. David looked away, jaw tightening. After a long pause, he said, "I once thought marriage was just paperwork. Two people agreeing not to destroy each other's lives. But lately, I am not sure what I think anymore." Rose's breath caught. She turned toward him fully. "What changed your mind?" He hesitated. The silence stretched so long that she thought he would not answer. Then, quietly, he said, "You did." "Yo." The honesty in his tone startled her. She opened her mouth to respond but found no words. Instead, she stepped closer, their reflections merging in the glass wall behind them. For a long moment, they simply stood there, two people, trapped by an agreement that no longer felt fake. The city wind tugged at Rose's hair, and David reached out instinctively, brushing a strand from her face. His hand lingered for a heartbeat too long before he drew it back. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "That was inappropriate." "No," she whispered. "It was human." Something fragile cracked open between them, and neither of them knew how to seal it again. He cleared his throat, searching for safer ground. "The scholarship event next week, you should design the floral arrangements. The board loved what you did with the greenhouse." Rose nodded slowly. "I would like that." They fell into another silence, gentler this time. Below them, the city glowed, alive and endless. David leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, Rose, I have spent years surrounded by people who want something from me. You are the first person who does not." She smiled faintly. "That is because I never expected anything from you, David, not even kindness." He turned his head toward her, "And yet, you brought it anyway." The space between them disappeared for a second, just long enough for their eyes to meet and something unspoken to pass through the air. Rose felt her heartbeat trip over itself. She looked away quickly, breaking the spell. "We should go back inside. They might notice we are gone." David's voice followed softly. "Let them notice." She froze, her hand on the door, and for one brief, trembling instant, she wanted to stay. But she forced herself to walk back into the light. Behind her, David remained on the rooftop, watching the fog swallow the skyline, wondering when pretending had become the most honest thing he had ever done. "And you," Listening now, do you believe love can grow out of something that started as a deal? The following morning, the illusion shattered. Rose Bennett woke to the distant hum of voices outside her suite. The mansion, usually quiet, buzzed with tension. When she stepped into the hallway, Clara was already there, her tablet clutched tightly against her chest. "Do not panic," Clara said quickly, though her tone betrayed worry. "The media has gotten hold of something. We are managing it." "What happened?" Rose asked, her heart beginning to race. Clara hesitated. "A story broke early this morning. Someone leaked details about your marriage. They are calling it a business deal, saying the relationship is fake. There are photos, documents. I am sorry." Rose froze. For a moment, the words did not make sense. "Fake?" she repeated. "But it is supposed to look real." "I know," Clara said softly, "but this is different. They have the contract." The color drained from Rose's face. She did not wait for another word. She turned and hurried down the stairs, her bare feet echoing against the marble floor. In the living room, David Ward stood near the fireplace, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "I said shut it down," he snapped. "Every platform, every outlet. I do not care what it costs." He ended the call and turned toward her. For a second, his expression softened, but then reality caught up to him. "Rose, is it true?" she interrupted. "They know everything?" "Yes," he admitted quietly. "Someone from the legal team leaked the documents. The board believes a rival firm paid for the information." Rose felt dizzy. "So now everyone thinks I married you for money." David stepped closer. "We will fix this. I will issue a statement." "What kind of statement?" she demanded. "That your poor, desperate wife signed a contract to play a part?" His silence was answer enough. She shook her head, tears welling up. "You promised this would protect me. You said no one would get hurt." Quote, "I did not plan this," he said, his voice firm but low. "I am trying to protect both of us." Rose took a step back. "You cannot protect me, David. You built this on lies." Her voice cracked, and the echo filled the vast room. Outside, camera flashes flickered through the tall gates at the end of the driveway. Reporters were already waiting. Someone shouted her name, muffled through the glass. David's phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. He looked at her with a strange mix of frustration and guilt. "You should stay inside until the press clears." Rose's hands trembled. "I cannot stay here. I cannot breathe here." "Rose." But she was already moving toward the door. Clara tried to stop her, but Rose brushed past, pulling her coat tight as she stepped into the rain. The sound of shutters and questions hit her like a wave. She did not answer. She just walked down the driveway, past the gates, until the city swallowed her whole. Back inside, David stood alone, staring at the silver ring she had left on the table. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. He could buy silence, rebuild a reputation, but he could not buy trust. He picked up the ring, the metal cold against his palm. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger one who had traded his humanity for control. Later that night, Clara found him still standing there, rain dripping from his sleeves where he had gone outside searching for her. "Sir," she said softly, "the lawyers want to know how to respond." David's voice was quiet, almost breaking. "Tell them to do nothing." "Nothing?" Clara asked, startled. "Yes," he said, "because everything I have done has already broken the one thing that mattered." He looked down at the ring again, gripping it tightly. "She will not come back," he whispered. "Not unless I find a way to prove this was never fake." But outside, the storm raged on, and for the first time, the mansion that had always felt cold now felt utterly empty. 1 week passed before the city began to forget. But David Ward did not. Every morning, new headlines appeared, twisting the story a little more: the billionaire's bride scam, the contract wife, the love that was never real. His PR team offered statements. Lawyers threatened lawsuits, but none of it mattered. Rose Bennett was gone, and the silence she left behind was louder than every scandal combined. He searched quietly, sending Clara to check every hotel and apartment near Mission District. Rose's phone remained disconnected, her shop shuttered. At night, David would return to the greenhouse, where she had planted new life from dust. The flowers were still alive, still reaching toward the light she had given them. That small miracle haunted him. He stood there one evening, the city fading to orange beyond the glass walls, and whispered to the empty air, "You made this place breathe again. I did not even know how much I needed that." The next day, he made a decision no board member could understand. He canceled meetings, cleared his schedule, and asked Clara to arrange something at the old botanical garden by the bay, a place Rose had once mentioned wanting to see restored. She loved it here, David said as workers set up a white canopy and rows of chairs among the roses. She said every wilted flower deserves one more chance to bloom. Clara hesitated. "Sir, is this for an event?" He nodded. For her. Within days, invitations were sent under the title The Garden of Second Chances. It was introduced as a charity exhibition sponsored by the Ward Foundation, showcasing floral installations designed in Rose's honor. He did not tell anyone that he had recreated her mother's dream, an entire garden of white roses, her favorite bloom. When the evening arrived, soft lights glowed across the bay. Guests whispered as they entered, unsure what kind of event this truly was. At the center of it all stood a small platform surrounded by a sea of white petals. David waited there, dressed simply in a charcoal suit, holding something small in his hand, a silver ring. He began to speak, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "A few months ago, I made a decision that changed my life. I thought I could control love, define it, even contain it. I was wrong. What began as an arrangement became the only truth I have left." The audience listened, unsure whether they were witnessing confession or performance. "I built my life on contracts," he continued, his gaze steady. "But some things cannot be signed or bought. Some things have to be earned with honesty, with humility, with time." Then, turning slightly, his voice softened. "Rose, if you are hearing this, if you are anywhere near this city tonight, I kept my promise. Nothing will be canceled." The words echoed through the garden, carried by the wind. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from the far end of the walkway, the crowd shifted. A figure appeared under the lights, hesitant, unsure. It was her. Rose stood still, the breeze tugging at her hair. Her eyes were red from tears, her face pale but calm. She looked around, at the white roses, at the inscription on the entrance arch that read, "The Garden of Second Chances," and then back at him. David stepped forward slowly, afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. "You came," he whispered. "I almost did not," she said. "I did not want this to be another performance." "It is not," he answered. "This time it is real." Claude. He held out the silver ring, the same one she had left behind. "You once asked if this was only for a year. You were wrong. It was never meant to end." Tears filled her eyes. "You hurt me, David." "I know," he said, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving I am not the man who wrote that contract. I am the man who broke it for love." She looked down at the ring, then back at him. The world around them fell silent. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. As he slipped the ring onto her finger again, he leaned close and whispered the same words that had once confused her but now carried a promise. "Nothing will be canceled." Applause rose softly, but neither of them heard it. They were too busy holding on to the truth that no contract could ever define. The night in San Francisco carried a quiet warmth that felt almost unreal. The air around the Garden of Second Chances still shimmered with candlelight, and the scent of roses lingered long after the guests had gone. The only sounds left were the waves brushing against the bay and the faint whisper of petals in the wind. Rose Bennett stood beside David Ward beneath the archway of white flowers, her hand still in his. The silver ring glimmered faintly in the glow of the garden lights. For the first time, she was not thinking about the past year, the contract, or the scandal. She was thinking about how the world had gone silent the moment she forgave him. David looked at her as if afraid to blink. "You should not have come back just because of an apology," he said quietly. "I did not," Rose answered. "I came back because I wanted to see if your words could grow something real." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that she had never seen before. "Then let us grow it together." They walked slowly through the rows of roses, their footsteps soft against the grass. The reporters were gone, the cameras packed away, but somewhere deep inside the city, the story was already rewriting itself. People would soon talk not about the scandal, but about the redemption of a man who learned that love is not a deal to be negotiated. When they reached the center of the garden, David stopped. He gestured toward a small frame placed beneath one of the rose bushes. It was a photograph, an image of Rose's old flower shop, Bennett Blooms. The sign was faded, but next to it was a new plaque engraved with her name. "I bought the building," David said. "It will reopen next month as a community flower studio. You once told me that wilted flowers deserve another chance. So will the people who walk through those doors." Rose covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted to." They stood there for a while, the world slowing around them. Then Rose took a deep breath and whispered, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had met differently?" David thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe I would have still fallen for you. I just would not have needed a contract to realize it." The wind carried the sound of her laugh across the garden. It was the same laugh he remembered from their first week together, the one that made the mansion feel less cold. Later, as the night deepened, they sat on a bench overlooking the bay. The city lights shimmered on the water like tiny promises waiting to be kept. Rose rested her head on his shoulder. For once, there were no words between them, only the steady rhythm of two hearts that had finally found their home. David reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. Inside was the same silver ring, but now a single word was engraved inside the band. He turned it so she could read it. Real. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He smiled gently. "No, you taught me how to make one." They leaned closer, their foreheads touching. It was not a kiss of fireworks or fairy tales, but one of quiet truth, a promise made in the simplest way two people could say forever. As the camera of the mind fades out, Rose's voice carries softly, like a narration to herself. Sometimes the things we pretend to believe become real when the heart chooses to stay. Love is not about contracts or conditions. It is about courage, the courage to begin again. The morning after, when the first rays of sunlight reached the garden, a sign hung at the gate, "The Garden of Second Chances," founded by David and Rose Ward. And somewhere across the city, people smiled at the headline that replaced every rumor. From a contract to a covenant, the love that refused to end. So tell me, watching their story now, what do you believe? Can something that begins as a lie ever become something real?